Good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. Unfortunately, I'm not in sunny Ticino, right? I'm somewhere in the mountains and it's raining outside and it looks pretty sad. But the highlight, of course, of today is being able to tell you some about my passion. And my passion is really developer tools, right? So, and I work on developer tools almost through my entire career, almost 30 years. Don't worry, I will not go back 30 years. I only want to go back 10 years, but these 10 years were really exciting. And I want to do it in basically in two stages. First, I want to tell you what we did. And then I want to look behind and show you how we built it, right? So that's kind of both a how and a what and a how talk. So without further ado, the first question is, well, is Visual Studio Code a success? So I have a guess if I would stand in front of you in an audience, I would ask, please raise your hand if you use it, but I cannot do that. So I just have to use surveys, right? And a very popular one is the Stackoverflow survey, which shows that Visual Studio Code on the question, what's your favorite development tool? So Visual Studio Code has kind of over 70% positive answers. Even more passion about in the JavaScript developer community, where we have 86% users that say it's their favorite developer tool. Unfortunately, it's from 2021. The latest service from State of Java is the question, what's your favorite editor? They removed that, unfortunately. Okay, so how did it all start? Well, I work on IBM, and then I joined Microsoft in 2011. I brought my team with me, which was a small team, right? We were kind of 10 developers that started, and the mission we had is act and work as a startup and invest in software development tools in the browser for the web, right? That's the mission we had. We were a startup, so we knew we have to deliver quickly, otherwise, the runway is not too long for, in particular, also Microsoft, right? You want to deliver and become relevant. So the first thing we built was the Monaco editor. And the Monaco editor really gave us the opportunity to get deep into web technology, to see how mature it is already, right? That the browser really fit for doing that you can build a code editor with a performance that you don't think you run in a browser, right? With webworks and so on, you can do many things asynchronously that you really get a responsive experience. We also learned early on, at this time, you don't need frameworks that shim you from the browser. And in particular, given our performance focus, we were always very clear, we don't need any UI frameworks, right? We want to really own our destiny when it comes to where the time is going. So that's Monaco, that's where we started. But before I go on, I want to really tell, this project goes for 10 years. It's a JavaScript code base, and JavaScript is pretty hard to maintain. You feel sometimes like carving code in stone, because renaming something can take a day, right? Till you have found all the references. TypeScript changes that and allows you to do a rename in a second instead of a day, right? So we really loved it. And it was really great. It all aligned with our development. TypeScript just started in 2010, and we are one of the first adopters of TypeScript. And as you see kind of in this little chart, so we started slowly, and over time we went full in, right? And by 2013, all our code had type annotations so that you could do refactorings with confidence. So this was really instrumental for us, given that our code base, you can imagine, with these 10 years, we have continuously tuned it, right? Performance is very important, and sometimes we rewrote major parts for performance, like how we render the editor, how we store text right in an editor. All that's got fully rewritten, which wouldn't have been possible without TypeScript as the tool in the back. We started an editor, but our ambitions were bigger, right? So we won't say, whoa, we built a web IDE. 2030 was a little bit early for that, but still the browser was fit, right? So on the front, on the client, we had the editor with a browser, source control integration, terminals, and so on. And we made this available as Visual Studio Online Monaco, which allowed you to edit websites. It was some of the creative approach, how we do really the backend, which is of course not needed anymore, given we have containers and all this orchestration infrastructure like Kubernetes. So that was 2013. It was nice. We were very happy. But even at that time, we were data-driven, and we looked at how many users do we have. And even so we had happy users, we only had 3,000. And 3,000 is really not for Microsoft. You don't get relevant with 3,000 users. So like a real startup, right, we had to get to a 10x, right? Actually, even more, 100x to become relevant for Microsoft. So at that point, we had to decide, what do we do? Do we continue on the web IDE with the technology we had, or we pivot? At that point, we have decided to pivot, and this is not made up, right? So at that point, the strategy doc we had was a 2-pager, and it was called Project Ticino. And of course, we take location or country names, because then you cannot get sued when you have used as a code name. Except when you use Monaco as a code name. Once we released Visual Studio on Monaco, then the little kingdom really didn't like that and wrote us a letter. And we put the name in quotes. But for Ticino, we don't have to do that. So the nice thing was Microsoft at that time really evolved, given Azure from a Windows-centered company to a multi-platform. And there was a real desire for having tools, not only for Windows, but for OS X and Linux as well. And the target audience you want to get at was really the born in the web developers, right? These are those developers that just grow up with the web, love the command line, are wizards with command line, they like lightweight tools. And we gave us the goal that after this document was written, that basically 6 months later, we will demo a first version of what we have at the Build conference, which is the largest Microsoft conference. So we did this pivot, started Dell, and we had to also answer now here, what kind of tool do we build? Because now, as you know, we have some history now on Eclipse. What do we do? Microsoft Visual Studio. And in the market, you were late, right? There were already editors. There was Vim, Sublime, Atom, which the born in the web developers really loved. So we had to find our spot, and we defined really our spot more on the lightweight side. We want to be a lightweight editor. But we don't want to forget what we love from the past, like refactoring, smart coding, right, with IntelliSense, code navigation, and so on. So that's where we positioned us, which means that we want to have debugging support, we want to have language support, deep language support, how we call it. The next challenge was, how do we get in the browser, from the browser to the desktop? And also there, we were kind of lucky in that the technology evolved. And with Electron, which is how it's now called, a framework became available which allows you to use web technology on the desktop, which is great, right? But Electron sits on top of Chromium. Chromium is no lightweight application, but really does top to bottom everything you need, right? Rendering, whatever is in there, which allows you to get a great engineering economy when it comes to cross-platform development. And as I can honestly say, without Electron, we couldn't have shipped this cross-platform coverage we have right now with the testing and investment we have. Electron is one challenge, it's a little bit heavyweight. So what became very clear to us, we have to make it appear like that users don't notice we run on Electron. So that's why from the beginning we had a really hard performance focus. What really helped us when it comes to performance is that we came from the web. And in the web, when you want to access a file, you make an HTTP request. When you start from Electron directly, you can access the file system directly, which means a file system access, right? But given that we came from a world where we had expensive file access, we really cared from the beginning about bundling, packaging things so that they load quickly. And this really is the key to our quick startup performance, right? Which is so key to the VS Code experience. So Electron came along. We had it and we achieved our goal. 6 months later, we announced it, which was kind of cool because it was a demo where it was shown that you run VS Code on Linux and you debug a .NET application, which was pretty nice. And VS Code was probably the first Linux application for Microsoft. And in particular, if you remember kind of the love Microsoft had in the past for Linux, that's pretty amazing. We had one challenge that while we were happy that we could achieve that, but people were very clear about, it's great, right, that you support that, but when it comes to editors, editors have to support many languages, many different frameworks. There's clear, we cannot build that all, so we need extensions. And we need for that a way, an API that extensions can contribute to VS Code. Now here history comes a little bit in because we have experience with extensions from Eclipse. Extensions are great, right? They make your tool much richer, but they can also hurt your tool because extensions can make you start up slowly if they do too much on startup. Extensions can go wild, right? So when you want to save your file and the extension has a problem, then you cannot save your file. So we said we don't want to do that, right? We don't want that a user cannot save a file. And how do we achieve that? We achieve it by running extensions as a separate process, which was also a bit inspired from the Chrome architecture. We want to really do a multi-process architecture. And what we also achieved with that extensions cannot get at the internals of VS Code. We define an RPC mechanism, and we expose an API specified in TypeScript that is used to access the VS Code core, the UI that enables the features. So all the extensions like themes or links or language services, they run in a separate node process. And fortunately, even we achieved that. 6 months later, we had the first set of extensions. It was kind of funny, we demoed the Go extension, and Anders Heilsberg, the creator of TypeScript, but he also did Turbo Pascal before he joined Microsoft. He demoed the Pascal extension, which was a nice little story. So that was the first goal we had to achieve based on community feedback. As I said, you want to support many languages, many frameworks, so you must be open source. And we also did that, right? We announced it at the same time after investing in the cleansing that Visual Studio Code is now open source with the extension API, which was a major milestone for us, of course. So what comes next? As I said, we like rich languages, right? Rich language support, IntelliSense refactoring, we like that. But we had a challenge, right? We're kind of late to the game, right? There is already Atom, Vim, there's also Eclipse, other tools. And one challenge we gave us, wouldn't it be nice if we had Java support in VS Code, which of course is a nice little loop, given that at IBM on Eclipse, I worked on Java. So can we leverage this work? And what can we do to do that so that it gets support in VS Code? And that's where the idea of a language server came into place, which is basically a separate process that runs the language brain that understands the code, that builds ASTs and so on, and that is running in a language server. Then the language server can communicate with the tool, with the IDE, through a standard protocol, which we call the language server protocol. And by doing that, by specifying this protocol, what we enabled is that a language server can be used in other contexts, in other tools, right? The tool, the language provider doesn't have to implement the language tool for each, the language support for each different tool. And that's what triggered the work. Then with Red Hat together, we worked together on a Java language server on the LSP protocol. And this ended up in an open specification that allows to use language servers across different tools. And now I guess there are over 100 language servers available that can be used in VS Code, but also in other tools. It was a pretty nice achievement. But of course, then the challenges continue, because new requirements come up for development tools. The first requirement that came out mostly from enterprises, right, is this policy, no source code on the laptop. You want to develop on the laptop, but there's no way you can do the company source code on your laptop. Facebook has this policy, or Meta, and Google, right? So that's an interesting challenge for development tool. The other interesting kind of vision or desire is for development tools that you have instant development environments, which means when I join a project, I don't have to spend 2 or 3 days going through outdated READMEs, trying to set up the tools, the prereqs, and trying to build the code. What you want is just, you join the project, you get a URL, whatever, and you're up and running, right? So it's easy way to define what the prereqs are, and that's all defined and easy reproducible. That's one scenario, joining a project. Another scenario for that is, as a developer, you often now have to work and reviewing code, reviewing a pull request. But just reviewing a pull request, you don't want to switch your current context, right? So that's why you want to have just an instant development environment created just for reviewing the pull request. So that's where we also, that's another kind of more ephemeral use of these instant development environments. And the third interesting challenge is, of course, now, given that the browsers are popular, iPads are popular, Chromebooks, you really want to access your code from anywhere. In a coffee shop, you have an iPad with you. You want to do some critical fix that unblocks a CI/CD build. So then the question is, well, how do we get there? And see, this started in 2016, right? So this is a major effort for us. And the solution is pretty simple. So what we did was this work on VS Code Remote. And on the left, you see the existing architecture, right? You have a core, the VS Code UI, that talks to RPC, to an extension host, and their extensions run implementing a particular, using a particular API. So the idea that came up, okay, can we just run another extension host remotely, right? And if we can do that and run extensions there as well, without that they notice, then we can achieve that code runs remote, distinct and distant from the VS Code core. So one example is that we had is kind of for the Windows subsystem for Linux that we have for Windows, where you want to really run the tools on the Linux side and the UI should be on the Windows side, right? And we can do that in that the extension will run remote on the WSL side. We'll use the Python tools that are installed on the WSL side, but the UI is still on the VS Code side. And for that to work, note the files are virtualized and the files are still stored remotely, but accessed through a virtual file system from VS Code. This was a major achievement that we could do that. It took us 3 years to get there. Major work was, can we really make it transparent, right? Our API has to be 100% bulletproof, that it also works in it when I write an extension for a different setup, like on the remote setup, it works as well. So that's why it took us 3 years to get there. But once we had that, we could reap the fruits of this big investment, and we could build several remote extensions that leverage the architecture, right? WSA and LX explained you already, which allows you to work with the Windows subsystem for Linux from the Windows side. Another one is SSH, which gives you a box you can have anywhere and connects through SSH to it. Usually in the past, you had to just use VI then once you are connected to an SSH tunnel. But now with this one, you can really use the full VS Code and work with an SSH box. The next one, the containers one, is interesting because it really brings us close to this idea of instant development environments, right? Because with the container extension, what it does, it has a Docker container, and the definition of what should go in there, which development tools will install the VS Code server, and then you talk from VS Code to the container, which has all the Purex bundle you need for development, right? That's kind of the first step to instant development environment. And one workhorse behind it is the specification of what's in a dev container. That's in a dev container JSON file. The basic is very simple, right? It defines which image you want to use, and the image has the development tools in there, like ESLint, Node, and so on, or TypeScript. You define which extensions you want to use in the dev container, because this will run remotely in the container, which initialization command you want to do, because it's an instant development environment, right? Once it's up, you should be ready to go. In this case, it should run yarn install, and you want to open some ports that you can connect your application to the container. So that's dev container JSON. Similar like LSP, we work on an open specification for that. That's just still work in progress. That's why I have a running man, but it should be the same approach, right? Whenever we want to have interoperability, we try to come up with an open specification. So that's dev containers. Now we come to anywhere access. And of course, anywhere access means the browser, right? So our VS Code server not only needs to be able to be accessed from the desktop, but also from the browser. So that means we had to first kind of make all our code that it runs in the browser again. While we initially kind of some years ago, right, almost 9 years ago, we were running in a browser. Over time, we added dependencies on Electron, which allowed us to leverage local native code like native dialogues or access the file system directly. So we had to abstract that and restructure the code again so that all the code is clean and runs in the browser. We did that through service injection, where you can have different implementations for different services, like for dialogues, that in the browser you have an HTML implementation, and then on the desktop use the native dialogue support. So that's brought us to support that we can run in the browser. So VS Code can run in the browser, and the VS Code server that enables that was recently also open sourced. So that was, I think last November, we open sourced the VS Code server, which means the whole package and how you can run VS Code in the browser. So now we have the puzzle pieces for instant development environment, which means this easy configured prereqs of your tools. And we have the anywhere access covered. And now GitHub Codespaces, which shipped in 2021 in this last summer, leverages and builds on top of that. So basically what it does is still the VS Code remote architecture. So in a Docker container, we run the VS Code server that runs your remote extensions, tools run in there, the files are in there. But what Codespaces really gives you, it manages a virtual machine for you that you can really run this managed in the cloud. And of course, this is a lot of work, right? This has to be fast, the provisioning and so on. So they have, of course, pre-built virtual machines to enable that. And what's nice is now with this architecture we have, you can connect to VS Code or your tool, your project, either from the browser, where you connect through HTTPS, or you can connect it from the desktop, right? Which is kind of a pretty powerful setup because you're not locked into the browser. Not everybody wants to develop in the browser because the browser has some constraints, right? The browser is opinionated. It wants to take some shortcuts like Control W. You cannot intercept that, and you will close your tool and so on. So that's why we give you the duality, accessing from the desktop or from the browser. And this was kind of the accomplishment from 2021. That was good, but then we had the thought, what happens, well, if you don't have Codespaces, right? You don't have the virtual machine, can we still give you access to VS Code from the browser? And again, we have the same puzzle pieces, and you made this happen, and we call this VS Code Dev. And actually, you can go there now, right? From your iPhone, wherever, you can go to HTTPS vscode.dev, and you get VS Code running in the browser. This has no backend, right? But we still have extensions. So what's going on? We have now added support that we can run extensions also in the browser, right? The browser HTML5 supports web workers, and we have an implementation of our extension host running in a web worker in the browser, which of course has some constraints, right? Because it's a different environment. The browser API is quite different than a full node API, but we still were able to bring several extensions along. So how do you access files in there? Fortunately, HTML5 involved further, and there's now a file system API, which means once you grant access to a folder, we can access from VS Code your local files on disk. But keep in mind, right, this is all running in the browser. There is no what we call compute or backend that runs and has access to all the files, right? So it's a little bit limited setup, but still requires no installation, and you get the VS Code editing experience. Now, just accessing local files is nice, but wouldn't it be nicer if you could access your project directly in this setup? And the answer is, can you do that? Of course, you guessed right. Yes, you can do that. And the idea is, again, you have an extension that enables that. This extension is an extension that can run in the web extension host. It gives you a file system based on the GitHub API, which, GitHub API allows you to access the Git tree. And through that, we can show you in the Explorer your files you're working on. We also have source control APIs. So when you make changes in the browser, we mimic them that it looks like you're in Git, and you can commit changes from there. So this extension, the remote repositories extension, allows to do that. And it's pretty powerful. And I don't know how many people know that on GitHub, you can press dot on any repository. And I want to show you that quickly. What happens when you press dot on any repository? VS Code tip, how you use it is code dot, which means open the current folder. So now this is generalized, open the current repository. That's why it's dot, which is nice. So I'm here in the VS Code repository, and I just press dot when I find it. And what happens then? VS Code for the web gets created. The extension remote repositories is already installed. And you can see I can browse my code, I can navigate to it, I can search, full text search, and so on, and have a nice editing experience. Even with full text search, I can read, which is pretty nice. But keep in mind, as I said, there is no compute or backend in place here, right? This is all running in the browser only. So if you go to the terminal, we will show you that terminals are not available in the web editor because you have no backend, you have no compute. But what we offer you, you can say continue working on. So I start in this repository browsing, and then I can say I want to continue on this repository either by cloning it locally or by creating a code space. And the code space will then provision a VM for me, check out the repository, and I have the full tools, full power available. So VS Code Dev also gives us a URL, and the URL allows also some interesting scenarios, right? So here, for instance, the VS Code Dev URL has some special components like a name of an extension and then some further details the extension can use. So with that, I can give you a URL that, in this case, installs the code tour extension on a particular tour of source code. So when I know that, then again, VS Code Dev starts up, but it opens the tour that is referenced from the URL. And then basically on your iPhone or wherever you are, you can review and go through the code tour and learn about code. Well, I never would program on an iPhone, but reviewing code on the iPhone is pretty nice, right? So that's one of the features that get really enabled by, by our support for running VS Code in the web. Okay, I think that was the demo I want to show you. And that also mostly concludes the tour of the last 10 years. And I hope you quite some exciting things happening in this 11 years by now. And you see today we have, if you look at the numbers, you have 20 million users, we have 30,000 extensions, NPS score 66, which is in the range of the iPhone, which is really nice. But here in red, this is what I want to talk next. It comes a little bit to the how we build and what is involved in building that. And you see in this 11 years, or since you're open source, you've closed over 120,000 issues, which is a lot, right? And now what I want to do next, I want to look into how do we manage this and how do we develop. So this is our repository. I mentioned we have lots of issues, but of course an issue can also be considered like a little love letter, right? Someone cares about your tool, which is a good thing. But it means for us as a development team, we have to manage that. And in red, you basically see a little bit the downside from the popularity of the green on top, right? You have many stars and so on, which is great. But the price you pay for that, we have 5,000 open issues. And at that point, this was 2021. Okay, I haven't updated, 180,000 closed issues. And this needs to be managed, right? And this is not free. And on the right, you see how many comments this has, right? So it's not only that you have to manage the issues, you have also engaged with the users, of course. Now, some features have hundreds of comments, right? You can imagine the passion users have on that and what we kind of have to work on as a development team. So the key to that is, of course, have a good development team. And our team by now, we started kind of in Zurich. We have 2 sites, one in Zurich and in Remit. We are now 25 devs. We have PMs, program managers, right? They do customer development and so on. We have 2 doc writers, a designer, actually 2 by now, no 3, 1 marketing person and 1 UX researcher. And our team builds kind of several components. It builds the VS Code core, Monaco editor. We collaborate with Electron, XMJS, and several extensions. As you can see, this has a lot of opportunities to work on. So we're always looking for people interested to join us, either as interns or full-time developers, to make VS Code even greater, right? So that's the team. But now, how do we survive, right, in these 10 years? And the rule was very simple. We ship every month with quality, okay? And when I say that, you can even go to our repository and you see that the proof for that is we have kind of over 69 iteration plans that we do for every month. And an iteration plan for us is just an issue in GitHub with a special label iteration plan. And what they show is just the query that shows that how many iteration plan issues we have closed, and it's 69, right? That's since you went open source. That's in the last 6 years. So that's okay. Shipping. So what happens inside an iteration? And I can show you that next. So that's when we double click on an iteration, we see we have basically 4 stages, right? The first week of the iteration, we do debt reduction, and that's very important, right? You cannot keep a software project running for over 10 years without debt reduction. And the debt, you know, has a tax, and if you don't fix it, you get slower and slower. So that's why we spend, from a 4-week iteration, 25% on debt reduction. And that's mostly self-guided, right? We trust in our developers. They know what they want to clean up, which architectural things that really nag, and so on, which issues they really must fix. And they do that. In parallel, we work kind of the dev managers, me and Kai from Redmond, we work and engage with our development team about what we want to do in the next iteration. And after this 1 week, we have some debt reduction and the iteration plan is ready. And typically, you know, you see every month, you do basically planning, but also this also involves replanning, right? While we have a roadmap, which is important, we still replan every month, you know, in a way, and adapt to new insights, right? Then for 2 or 3 weeks, we have some iterations to 5 weeks. We just run, which we have daily stand-ups. In the daily stand-ups, we have team demos. They show the progress, get feedback, highly interactive. It's not a stand-up in the classical Scrum things, which takes only 2 minutes. Our stand-ups take an hour or more because we go very deep. As you see, we're really not Scrummy-like, right? We kind of, Scrum guys, they would hold their nose when they see us because what, 4 weeks? That's a very long iteration. Good Scrum guys do 1 week iterations. Right? But it's ridiculous, right? Because we do that in 10 years and I will always tell them, great, do 1 week iterations for 10 years and then you can come back to me, right? Okay, that's the run phase, which is where we really crank out new features, do stuff, prove performance, whatever. And then we come to the end game. Another thing that Scrum guys smile at, wow, you shouldn't need that, right? Because you're always good. We're not that good, I confess. But what we do in the end game, everyone tests. So basically we write test plans, items for each new feature, and then we assign them automatically. We have some tool that do that and does the load balancing. Then everyone fixes, and also everyone writes release notes and updates the documentation. After that, once we're ready, we let it cook a little. We look kind of, we freeze changes and we see what comes in and fix candidates, polish the release notes. And then after some time, we ship it, right? And we ship it typically also with the idea to reduce the stress for us as a team. We kind of ship it with the option to have a patch release shortly after, right? Typically 1 week after shipping, we let it out, then we watch telemetry, we watch issues that come in, and then if needed, we have a patch release with up 10 to 12 issues, right? That's the goal. Okay, so that's kind of inside an iteration. Then I mentioned the endgame, which we rotate. There's an endgame champ. The endgame is also tracking an issue, which you see. It says, as our checklist, we have all these test plan items, which are just issues with a test prefix and some structure, know in which platforms you have to test, what's the complexity, what are the steps. The complexity assignment is used for load balancing, right? That not ever, if you have a very heavy test plan item, that not a single developer gets all the test plan items. So then everybody's a tester and then everybody's a writer. That's kind of the end game. The release notes are important to us because what you've built with iteration, you have to sell that. So we spend a lot of effort in the release notes. Now we have animated GIFs that show you a feature and so on. A very important section of the release notes is the thank you section, where we say thank you to contributors. Because contributors, they contribute not only pull requests and code, they also help us with the issues. As I said, we get, you see that we get 2,000 to 3,000 issues and per day. I will see that. That's per day, right? Yeah. And of course, they help us with triaging, connecting the dots and so on. And that's really great. So the community is really great. The pull requests we get also. That's why we say always thank you, because it's really, we appreciate that a lot. So we don't work kind of full steam the full year. We always have one housekeeping iteration per year, and the housekeeping iteration has to go bring the issues down, right? So we kind of, GitHub only shows you 5,000 issues. After that shows you 5,000 plus, right? And that little hurts our egos, right? So we always try to come back below, significantly below 5,000. Right? And that's what we do. Now we fix issues first. We clean up the issues, triage them, label them. Right? Is it a bug? Is it a feature? And then we really fix them. And typically, after the end of this housekeeping iteration, in the beginning, the developers don't really like them, but in the end, they're always excited and feel like freshly showered. Right? That's how they tell the housekeeping iteration experiences. So that's how we get also the quality. Right? If we get too thorough in the too many issues, that's how we get it down. So on Apple, they once called it snow leopard. They make a snow leopard release, which means no new features, only issues and performance. That's similar. So how do we survive with all this stuff? So we share recurring duties, right? We have all this managed, and who is in charge for doing inbox tracking, right? Every issue should be viewed at least one day, and we have a round robin assignment. We have bots and GitHub Actions to do that. We have a build champion. We have, of course, continuous build, and the build champion tracks build and test failures, creates issues for others to fix, so that also the tests, and in particular the smoke test, runs continuously. And then also the endgame champion is a round robin assigned to each team member, right? And the table on the right, so everybody's involved here, including me, right? I'm also an inbox tracker and so on. So that's how we kind of have is sustainable, right? So our goal is, if you have a project that has to run for 10 years, it has to be sustainable, and recurring and sharing duties helps us to make this sustainable. The other important thing is depth, which also helps to keep the code and sustainable, right? So continuous feedback is critical. Dogfooding is critical to us. As I told you, the most fun part of work on development tools is you can use them yourselves, and of course with the development tool, you can use it every day the latest. So we have an insider build, which is a separate channel that we update daily, that we, the development team, use, but also our users. We have about 50,000 insider users. They give us feedback, basically, on our day-to-day work. If something is broken, we are highly motivated to fix it because this is a tool we use. And then once a month, right, we have we update the version in the stable channel, which has gone through an endgame to all the quality measures we have there, and the documentation is then updated for that as well. So that's a very important quality measure for us. Then when it comes to community management, that's kind of a new discipline, right? When it comes to open source, you have to manage your community, and you not only throw code over the wall. The principle we follow there is zero distance, right? You want to have zero distance between us, the development team, PMs, whatever, and our users, our community. And the first step to that is we are transparent, right, in that what we do. So we have a roadmap that we update every year. Maybe 18 months is more fair. I have a roadmap that's published, and also iteration plans. You see below here, the roadmap is mostly text. The iteration plan, what we work on, is also public, right? It helps users to engage. Oh, great to see that you finally work on this feature, right? I will help you test that. It's really valuable. Of course, some users will say, hey, but you haven't fixed my feature, right? So I'm sorry for that. But we do try to do our best, right, to really make the community happy. And I will show some other tools we use for that. The team is responsive on social channel, right? We have on Twitter, we track the Twitter feeds. It's also rotated, right? Among them, we are on Stackoverflow, we have Hacker News, Gitter, and Slack, and so on for social channels. And as I said before, I was wrong. 2,000 per day didn't make sense. So we have 2,000 to 3,000 issues per month that come in that need to be managed, and you want to be responsive to them. And the goal is every issue is seen the same day, right? So which is really helped now by a bot that we train it with machine learning, right? That does an initial triage of an issue, if a good issue has description, and if it matches, we know which component belongs to this description, and then it gets assigned to the owner of this component. And this is how we can really reduce the load in managing all these issues and ensure that the issues are seen every day. Interestingly, our bot is currently so good that we can remove the inbox tracker role and we give everything to the bot. So if the bot is unsure about who to assign it, we just have a list of people that are in and not on vacation that the issue get just in a round robin fashion assigned to. So that's a major investment, that we have good bots. And of course, we listen to feedback and emotions. That's part of zero distance, right? If you never listen to feedback, people will stop giving you feedback. And so we look at the upvotes, downvotes, and yeah, we try to engage. And sometimes we really do features which we really didn't like tabs or things like that. This just was something we didn't want to do. But in the end, we had to give in, and we were kind of still happy with the result. But that's part of the community management, community engagement, right? Zero distance means zero distance, and sometimes you also give in on something that you think is really not needed, right? Because tabs, we don't need tabs. I mean, I'm going to edit tabs on top. For each edit, you get a tab. And we really thought this is not needed in and particularly since it's on a browser, right? Tabs and tabs, didn't like that. But no, we have a very nice tabs story now, thanks to all these discussions. When you do that, we also engage in the issue and show the UX designs in the issue and engage with the community. We even invite them to calls that they can give us direct feedback. For that, we have a UX researcher in the team that helps us to then also these interviews and so on. So we try to be very a very consistent way to get this feedback. That's zero distance. But behind the scenes, you have many tools, right? That's the thing. We are not only invest stuff in VS Code, we invest a lot in tools that help us. I mentioned the bots we have, right? We have quite some bots that help us manage that. We have commit hooks that help us with hygiene checks as we check in. We have unit tests. We have a unit test pyramid, right? You have unit tests, we have function tests, and then we have kind of the smoke test, the UI test on top. And we run them all automatically on GitHub. Here's one example of another tool we have, hot issues. Right, you want to make the community happy. So you want to know which issue is really frustrating. So the hot issues are basically just by analyzing the words in there. I'm really frustrated. I will never use you again. I will switch to whatever. I sell my Microsoft stock, whatever. If you see that, right, the issue becomes a heat and the hot issues come on top. And then during the housekeeping iterations, we really try to address these hot issues. And we have a whole tool set. You see that on the left, kind of that we have. We can query extensions. We manage the endgame, the test assignments, and so on. This is all automated, right? And also some reports that help us. Okay, they're very important. If you have so many users, you ship frequently, right? And you ship on many platforms. What you see here is kind of our build management tool. This allows us to manage the builds we released to the community. We have a stable page and insider page, and for each platform, we can control on the right column whether it's released or frozen, right? If you release something that breaks many users and we see the feedback, we can freeze it immediately. And we can also roll back if needed, but typically always go forward, we fix it. But we can stop the rollout if we see a problem in a release, which of course we track by issues, Twitter, and so on, monitoring social channels. So that's that. The bots are pretty nice. Now we have lots of bots. Some of the bots just helped us with commenting. They'll just say that this needs more info. Then you get a nice wording from the bot. Hey, please read our usage guidelines, right? Because not all bots have the quality we want and we cannot act on them. So we want to be friendly. And we also have some creative usage of bots. For instance, if the developer fixes an issue and assigns a label inside a release, then the bot will come in and create a message for the submitter of the issue and tell him, hey, your bug is now fixed in Insiders. Please download it and verify it. Once you've done that, just assign the /verified text, and based on that, we will then tag, here you see the author has verified it and we are done with that, right? So that's really a nice thing, how you use bots to manage all these issues we have. As I said, 3,000 a month, you have to do that, otherwise you will not survive. And we also really, that's an intentional decision, right? If we say we want to double our users, we start with very few users, right? Then we have to be even better. We will get even more feedback. So the more we have to invest in these tools, obviously. Okay, so the nice thing is this gets really appreciated. And you see now here, this is Octoverse, right? GitHub publishes the state of the Octoverse metrics about GitHub. And one of the statistics they have is number of contributors. And you see VS Code was kind of in 2009 was the lead. I haven't looked at when the last one was published, but you're a strong lead with contributors, right? We have a significant number of contributors, which means people writing pull requests or people submitting new issues. And even we got some nice praise, right? But people think about that VS Code is really a well-managed open source project. And this includes, of course, the change logs, release notes, and the community management. Yeah. And sometimes, of course, this can be funny. For instance, just yesterday, we got a pull request that changes our MIT license to to the viral one, right? I forgot the name. Embarrassing. But yeah, it was funny, right? We don't take all pull requests, right? So GPL, sorry, now I have it, right? So it's funny, right? They give us a pull request, replace MIT license with GPL. I was like, yeah, great, we're done with that. So good. Anyway, so that's concludes basically the tour. And you see behind the scene, there's a lot of sweating, right? It's not only nice architecture, it's not only good code quality, it's also a lot of just heavy engineering work and community work that we get to this point. To conclude, so how do you create this overnight success? So what are some of the characteristics for that? And the first of one is, of course, be patient, right? So for VS Code, in the first 5 years we worked, right? Nobody knew about that, or very few people. But then it really took off much later. So be patient, right? The second thing is be persistent, right? We said ship every month. Since 10 years, 11 years, we ship every month a new release. We plan every month, right? Very important to create an overnight success, you have to be fit, that you can run that long. And you get fit by really reducing depth on your code base, right? This is why we spend 25% of our time in iteration on depth reduction. You also have to be willing to pivot. Initially, we thought, yeah, we built the web IDE, will all be great, whatever, but didn't take off. So we had to pivot, switch to a desktop IDE, and in the end, then come back to web IDE, right? Which is funny how we do it. And the last thing is, of course, be lucky, right? Because sometimes just technology has to align, right? Electron became available. Microsoft became cross-platform, open source supporting, cloud infrastructure, right? Containers and so on came along that allows you to build the cloud infrastructure and so on. And the timing has to just align. And sometimes you're just too early, right? 2050, we're just too early with what we had. It was even significant parts of the code base has remained till now, but it's just a different packaging positioning has helped us. So with that, I want to conclude and just invite you for coding in a happy way. Right, and if you want to follow us or see what I talked about and watch it, you can just go to the VS Code repository on GitHub. You see our issues, you see our plans, you see our test plan items. You can watch everything. Our roadmap is there, and yeah, that's all I want to say. And I want to open it for questions.